The morning at the Clark household had started like any other, with the usual routine of coffee and cereal. But everything changed with the shrill ring of the phone. Madison, holding her coffee cup with both hands, answered with slight irritation at the interruption. "Hello." Her voice was a mix of curiosity and anxiety. "Mrs. Clark, this is Dr. Reynolds. I'm sorry to inform." The doctor's voice was gentle, but his following words fell like a dagger into Madison's heart. "Your parents, Catherine and William, were involved in a severe accident this morning. Unfortunately, they didn't survive." The phone nearly slipped from Madison's trembling hands. She sat down abruptly, the impact of the news sucking all the air from the room. Ethan and Ella, her teenage children, noticed the immediate change in their mother's demeanor and approached, concerned. "Mom, what happened?" Ethan asked, his voice laden with worry. Madison struggled to find the words. "Your grandparents, they're gone." Her voice was a painful whisper, each word heavy with the weight of grief. Ella, the younger one, ran to embrace her mother, her own tears starting to form silent rivers down her face. Ethan, trying to maintain composure, placed a comforting hand on their shoulders. Together, they formed a small bastion of sorrow and mutual support. After a few moments of shared mourning, Madison took a deep breath, gathering strength to face the next challenge. "We need to go to the notary's office," she said, trying to infuse a tone of resolve into her choked voice. "They will tell us about the inheritance and what happens now with Grandpa's company." Ethan, always the more practical one, grabbed the car keys. "Let's go then. The sooner we know everything, the better we can plan what to do." On the way to the car, Madison allowed herself a moment of reflection. Her parents' shipbuilding company, a renowned institution in the port city where they lived, was now her responsibility. She had always admired her parents' passion and dedication to their work, but had never desired to be at the helm of the business. The magnitude of the task before her seemed overwhelming. "Mom, are you okay?" Ella asked, her hand finding Madison's. Madison forced a smile, squeezing Ella's hand. "It's going to be all right, dear. We need to be strong now, for them." Ethan, driving, kept his eyes on the road, but his mind was racing. "We'll find out everything at the office. No matter what happens, we're in this together." Madison looked at her children, her resolve strengthened by their presence. "Yes," she agreed, "together." As they arrived at the notary's office, the tension was palpable. Madison adjusted her coat, attempting to arm herself with an additional layer of courage to face whatever lay on the other side of that door. Ethan and Ella followed their mother into the office, each grappling with their own fears and hopes about what the notary's words would bring. As soon as Madison, Ethan, and Ella entered the notary's office, an unpleasant surprise awaited them. Bradley, Madison's husband until then, was there, not alone as they had expected, but accompanied by several women, each dressed with a cold and calculated elegance. Madison felt a sting of shock and betrayal at seeing this scene, her hands involuntarily clenching into fists. "Bradley, what does this mean?" Madison's voice trembled with a mix of anger and despair. Bradley, realizing too late the mistake of not anticipating their arrival earlier, tried to compose a look of calm. "Madison, these are business consultants. We're here to discuss some financial aspects." The women looked at each other, clearly uncomfortable with the situation, but none spoke a word. Ethan, whose loyalty to his mother was fierce, intervened with a cutting coldness. "Seems like the kind of consultancy that requires a full audience. Very convenient." The notary, an older man with thin-rimmed glasses, drew everyone's attention. "Please, let's sit down and proceed with the reading of the will. It's important we keep focused on the matter that brings us here." Everyone took their seats, with Madison and her children on one side of the table and Bradley with his companions on the other. The notary opened the sealed envelope and began reading the details of the inheritance. In accordance with the wishes of William and Catherine Clark, The Clark Marine Company will be divided as follows. The notary's voice was monotone, but each word increased the tension in the air. Madison listened attentively, while Bradley tried to maintain an appearance of control. Bradley Johnson will receive 20% of the company shares, along with the operational responsibility for 2 of the smaller facilities. Madison could hardly believe what she was hearing. Part of the company that her parents had built with so much care was being handed over to Bradley? And what else was to come? The notary continued. The remainder, including the main headquarters and 80% of the shares, will be inherited by Madison Clark. A sigh of relief escaped Madison, but the surprises were far from over. Furthermore, the notary added, Madison will inherit the vast family farmlands on the outskirts of the city, while Mr. Johnson will receive the luxury apartment in the city. Bradley, clearly frustrated with the distribution, tried to argue. This makes no sense. I should be managing the main company. I have more experience. Madison, her patience at its limit, confronted Bradley directly. Experience? Or do you mean experience in betrayal and manipulation? I never wanted the company, but I will do everything to protect my parents' legacy from people like you. Ethan and Ella watched, apprehensive but proud of their mother's determination. The argument between Madison and Bradley grew, with accusations being thrown without reservation. The notary, trying to regain some control, interrupted. Please reserve these matters for a more appropriate setting. There are more items to be discussed, and we need to proceed with order. Madison retreated, taking a deep breath. She knew that this battle was far from over, but she was determined to face each challenge for the sake of her children and in memory of her parents. The morning was shrouded in a gray mist as Madison and her children placed the last box in the spacious, yet impersonal entrance hall of the luxury apartment. The building, an imposing tower of glass and steel, reflected the dawn light in an almost austere manner, a perfect metaphor for the new life that awaited them. It's so different from our house in the country, Ella commented, looking around with a mix of admiration and hesitation. Everything here seems so cold. Madison offered a tremulous smile, trying to hide her own uncertainty. Let's make this place a home, dear. You'll see, with a little love and some plants, it will feel cozier. Ethan, who had taken on a more practical role since the death of their grandparents, began organizing the boxes. Let's start with the bedrooms. That way we can at least sleep in real beds tonight. The 3 split up, each taking on a different part of the house. Madison entered what would be her bedroom, a suite with a view of the urban horizon, where the lights were already beginning to twinkle as day gave way to night. She allowed herself a moment to absorb the view, the frenetic pace of the city pulsing below her. As she unpacked her clothes, Madison thought about how her life had been turned upside down in such a short time. The company, the sudden death of her parents, Bradley's betrayal. Each thought was a reminder of the battles she still needed to face. Are you okay, Mom? Ethan's voice came from the doorway, pulling Madison out of her thoughts. She turned to see her son, his face reflecting concern beyond his years. I am, yes. Just thinking about everything we need to do. Ethan entered the room, sitting on the edge of the bed still covered with clothes and boxes. I know it's hard for you. For all of us. But we'll get through this together. You're not alone. Madison sat next to him, putting an arm around his shoulders. I know, sweetheart. And I couldn't do this without you and Ella. Let's make this place our new home, no matter what happens. They spent the next hour unpacking together, talking about small things, trying to bring a bit of normality to the abnormal situation they found themselves in. Later, they joined Ella in the living room, where they tried to decide on the arrangement of the furniture. What do you think, Mom? The sofa here, near the window? Ella asked, trying to drag a large beige sofa across the wooden floor. Madison laughed, a genuine laugh she hadn't felt since before the tragedy. I think so. The view is beautiful, even if it's different from the hills we're used to. They spent the rest of the day organizing, decorating, and little by little, the cold apartment began to feel less like a strange space and more like a home. However, as night fell, the reality of the vast city outside began to seep in through the large windows, reminding Madison of the struggles that lay ahead. The afternoon dragged slowly in Madison's new apartment, with the sun setting behind the skyscrapers, casting long shadows over the city. She was in the kitchen, organizing the last items when the intercom buzzed, breaking the silence. With a heavy premonition, Madison answered. "Yes." Her voice was cautious, anxiety tingling at her fingertips. "It's me, Bradley. We need to talk." "I'm downstairs." His voice came through the intercom, surprisingly firm. Madison hesitated for a moment before responding. "Come up." Ethan, who was passing through the kitchen at that moment, heard the exchange. "Mom, are you sure?" His look was laden with concern. Madison nodded, trying to appear more confident than she felt. "Yes, it's better we settle this once and for all." A few minutes later, the doorbell rang and Madison went to open the door. Bradley was there, impeccably dressed as always, but with a visible tension on his face. Without waiting for an invitation, he entered. "Madison, we need to sort things out about the company and our divorce," Bradley began, avoiding her gaze. Madison crossed her arms, her stance rigid. "Yes, Bradley. Let's be clear. Why were all those women with you at the notary's office?" Bradley sighed, running a hand through his hair. "They are associates. Investors interested in Clark Marine. I was trying to secure the future of the company." "Associates? Or something more?" Madison interrupted, her voice rising slightly with the implied accusation. Bradley hesitated, his gaze shifting to the floor before meeting hers again. "Madison, it's not what you think. Everything I did thinking of what's best for the company, for our family." Madison laughed bitterly. "Family? Don't make me laugh, Bradley. I've seen the messages, the calls. Do you really expect me to believe all this was for us?" Ethan, hearing the argument heating up, appeared at the entrance of the room, ready to intervene if necessary. Ella also joined, her face showing a mix of anger and disappointment. "You destroyed our family, Bradley. You chose this," Madison continued, each word laden with pain and betrayal. Bradley shook his head, frustrated. "Madison, I made mistakes. But we can get through this. We can start over, for the company, for our children." Madison looked at her children, then back at Bradley. "No, Bradley. It's over. We'll settle this legally. As for the company, I will do as my parents wished, and you'll have your part as per the will." Bradley stepped back, defeated. "So that's it? You're going to let everything end like this?" "You ended everything a long time ago, Bradley. I'm just beginning to rebuild," Madison replied, firm and resolute. With a final nod to her children, who stood by her side, Bradley left the apartment, the door slamming behind him with a definitive sound. Madison turned to Ethan and Ella, who quickly came to embrace her. "It's going to be all right," she whispered, holding them close. "We will get through this together." As night fell over the city, Madison felt a mix of relief and apprehension about what the future held. She knew many challenges still lay ahead, but with her children by her side, she was ready to face them. It was a cold afternoon, and the gray sky mirrored Madison's mood as she tried to concentrate on her work. The soft knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Opening it, she found a middle-aged man dressed in a sharply cut suit, carrying a leather briefcase. "Mrs. Clark, I'm Thomas Redwood, a lawyer. Your father hired me several years ago," the man introduced himself, extending a hand. Madison greeted him, still confused. "Please, come in. How can I help you?" Thomas entered and they sat down in the living room, where daylight struggled to penetrate the heavy urban curtains. "I know this must be an extremely difficult time for you," Thomas began, opening his briefcase. "William, your father, was a very cautious man. Before he passed away, he made me promise to take care of certain matters should anything happen." Madison, intrigued and slightly anxious, leaned forward. "What kind of matters?" Thomas pulled some documents from his briefcase and handed them to her. "Your father anticipated the possibility of complications with Bradley. He wanted to protect you and your children from any eventualities." Madison took the documents, her hands trembling slightly. "What exactly did my father do?" "He altered his will and the structure of his inheritance a few months before his death," Thomas explained. "He left the visible part of the company to Bradley, the part he knew Bradley would value for its status and visibility. However, the true assets, those generating most of the profit and a considerable amount of money, were left to you. It's all here." Madison leafed through the documents, a mix of relief and admiration for her father filling her. "I had no idea he had done this." "Your father was a shrewd man and loved you and your children dearly," Thomas said, watching her closely. "He wanted to ensure that you were protected. This means that Bradley—" Madison stopped, realization hitting hard. "Bradley thought he was getting the better part," Thomas completed. "But in reality, he only has a small fraction of what Clark Marine is actually worth. Your father made sure that the most valuable part of the inheritance was yours." Madison felt a wave of emotions: gratitude for her father, relief at being financially secure, and a renewed wave of determination. "What should I do now?" "I suggest we start planning how you want to manage these assets. You have many options, and with the right strategy, you can ensure a prosperous future for you and your children," Thomas advised. Madison nodded, feeling for the first time in weeks like she had some control over her destiny. "Thank you, Thomas. I need to think about all this, but we will definitely make those plans." They talked for a few more minutes about legal implications and next steps. When Thomas said goodbye, Madison felt a mixture of hope and determination. She knew that the decisions she would make next were crucial, not just for her immediate future, but for the legacy she would leave for her children. As Thomas walked away, Madison looked out the window, contemplating the city below. The lawyer's revelation not only illuminated her understanding of her father's last wishes, but also gave her a new perspective on her own ability to shape the future. After the lawyer's revelation, Madison felt a new energy pulsing through her. With her father's documents in hand, she knew she had the opportunity to start something new, something that would make a real difference. The idea began to take shape one morning as she watched birds flying freely outside her apartment window. Sitting at the kitchen table with a steaming cup of tea, Madison was flipping through a local newspaper when an article about an animal protection NGO caught her attention. The organization was struggling to stay afloat due to funding cuts and a lack of resources. Something inside her clicked. "Ethan, Ella, come here please," Madison called out, her voice laden with enthusiasm she hadn't felt in a long time. The two joined her, curious. "What is it, Mom?" Ethan asked, as Ella settled beside him. Madison pointed to the article. "I was thinking, what if we used the inheritance to help this NGO? To really do something that would make a difference?" Ella, always passionate about animals, lit up. "Really, Mom? That would be amazing." Ethan, more reserved, pondered the idea. "It's a big responsibility, but I think it would be a good way to use the money. And help the community too." Encouraged by her children's support, Madison decided to visit the NGO the next day. The small headquarters was in a modest neighborhood of the city, a simple building that housed a dedicated but clearly overwhelmed team. Upon arrival, she was greeted by Daniel, the NGO's manager, a middle-aged man with eyes that reflected a passion for his mission. "Mrs. Clark, it's a pleasure to welcome you. What brings you to us?" Madison looked around, seeing the animals cared for with so much affection in such a limited space. "I read about your situation in the newspaper and, well, I've recently inherited some resources that I'd like to invest here." Daniel looked surprised but hopeful. Are you serious? That could change everything for us. I'm very serious, Madison confirmed with a smile. I would like to get involved personally, not just as a financier, but really help on a daily basis. Daniel's eyes brightened at the offer. That would be wonderful. Our biggest struggle has been the lack of hands and resources. Madison spent the rest of the day at the NGO, getting to know the team, the animals, and learning about the specific needs of the project. She felt an immediate connection and a sense of purpose that had long been dormant within her. As the day came to an end, Madison was full of ideas and plans. Let's do this. Let's transform this place, provide better care for the animals, and perhaps expand our influence even further in the community. Daniel extended his hand, a grateful smile on his face. I'm so glad, Mrs. Clark. You don't know how much this means to us. Walking back to her car, Madison felt a lightness she hadn't felt since before her parents' death. She was doing something good, something meaningful, and she knew that, in some way, her parents would be proud of her. Madison stood, observing the vast land she had inherited, the gentle wind swirling her hair as she planned her next major project. The lands, previously underutilized, would now be the setting for a significant community and environmental transformation. She had organized a meeting with community leaders and sustainability experts to discuss the potential of these lands. The meeting took place under a large tent set up in the middle of the field, with maps and projects spread out on the tables. Mrs. Clark, we appreciate you calling us together. The community is really excited about the possibilities, said George, the leader of the local residents association, extending his hand in greeting. Madison smiled, shaking his hand firmly. I'm as excited as you are. Let's create something together that can benefit all of us and also respect the environment. A sustainability development expert, Dr. Lisa Mendez, pointed to one of the maps. We have an opportunity here to implement sustainable farming practices. We can also consider creating public green spaces, areas for environmental education, and even small local businesses that follow ecological principles. Madison nodded, absorbing the information. I love the idea of educational green spaces. We can organize workshops and bring schools for visits. I want children to grow up knowing how to take care of our planet. Ella, who had joined her mother on the project, interjected with enthusiasm. We could also have an art program with recycled materials. It would be fun and educational. And what do you all think about a local producers market? Suggested Ethan, who had developed an interest in business and economics. It could stimulate the local economy and offer fresh, sustainable products to the community. The meeting continued with palpable energy, everyone contributing ideas and expressing their hopes for the future of the land. Madison took notes, already visualizing the next steps. At the end of the gathering, Madison felt invigorated and inspired. Thank you all for coming and for bringing so many amazing ideas. Let's take the next step and start planning more concretely. I want this to be a collaborative project. Each one of you has a vital role in this. People began to disperse, chatting animatedly as they left the tent. Madison lingered behind, looking out over the lands with a new sense of purpose. She knew she was on the right path, honoring her parents' legacy in a way they could never have imagined. Walking back to her car, Madison reflected on the many possibilities. She felt as if she were building something lasting, not just for her family but for the entire community. It was a challenge, but she was ready to face it with all the passion and dedication she could muster. The office that once symbolized Bradley's success and power now reflected his downfall. The disordered documents on the table and the empty walls, devoid of the certificates and recognitions of the past, were a grim testament to his rapid descent into isolation and financial ruin. Sitting behind his desk, Bradley ran his trembling fingers through his graying hair, trying to understand where it all went wrong. The phone rang, breaking the oppressive silence of his office, but he hesitated before answering. Finally, with a resigned sigh, he He picked up the receiver. "Bradley Johnson," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "From the fraud department, Mr. Johnson. We are investigating some discrepancies in the financial records of Clark Marine. We need you to come to the station to provide some clarification," the cold voice on the other line informed. Bradley felt his stomach twist. "I understand. I'll be there in the morning," he replied, his voice now a whisper. After hanging up, he leaned back in his chair, his mind spinning with the potential consequences of his actions. The questionable decisions, the risky financial maneuvers, it all seemed to finally catch up to him. In a local cafe, Bradley's former colleagues and business partners gathered, murmuring about his downfall. Among them was Roger, a former associate who had fallen out with Bradley years ago. "Did you see what happened to Bradley?" Roger asked, raising an eyebrow as he sipped his coffee. "Yes, I heard the police are involved now. Frauds, embezzlements, it's a long list," responded Linda, another former colleague who had little sympathy for Bradley after a series of failed projects. "And to think he believed he was untouchable, playing with the company's money as if it were his own," Tom commented, shaking his head in disbelief. The conversation continued, each adding their own experience and observation about Bradley's failures and schemes. It was evident that he had burned many bridges, leaving a trail of resentment and distrust. Meanwhile, Bradley desperately tried to find a way out. He called several acquaintances, seeking support or any help that could save his career and reputation. But each call ended in another closed door, another former ally turning their back. Finally, he called his lawyer, his last hope for some relief or direction. "Mike, please tell me there's something we can do," Bradley pleaded. "Bradley, the situation is serious. You haven't left many options for yourself. We'll do the best we can, but you need to be prepared to face the legal consequences," the lawyer responded, his voice laden with reluctant realism. Bradley hung up the phone, feeling the weight of the world on his shoulders. He looked out the window of his office to the city outside, knowing the coming days would define his future in ways he feared to face. After a long and productive day at the NGO, Madison sat down in the small restroom, surrounded by her children, Ethan and Ella, and some dedicated team members. The walls were adorned with photos of animals that had been helped by the organization, a visual reminder of the positive impact of their collective work. "I really couldn't do this without all of you," Madison began, looking around with a smile of gratitude. "Every little effort contributes to something much bigger than us." Ella, always enthusiastic, responded with a sparkle in her eyes. "And we're here because you inspired us, Mom. Seeing how dedicated you are makes us want to help more and more." Ethan, more reserved but equally committed, added, "It's true. And it's not just here. The school has started noticing our initiatives. Some of my classmates want to start a sustainability club." The conversation was interrupted by Daniel, the NGO's manager, who entered the room with a folder of documents. "Madison, we have some ideas to expand our educational programs. I thought you might want to take a look." Madison accepted the folder, excited. "Of course, Daniel. Let's see what you've planned." As they flipped through the documents, they discussed potential partnerships with local schools and workshops for the community. With each page, Madison felt more excited about the possibilities. "This is fantastic, Daniel. I love the idea of monthly workshops. It really can extend our reach," Madison commented, clearly impressed. Daniel smiled, pleased with the positive response. "And there's more. We're thinking about starting a small monthly adoption fair to help some of our furry friends find loving homes." "Ethan, could you help with the marketing part? Your skill with social media can really give us a boost," Madison suggested, turning to her son. "Absolutely, Mom. I already have some ideas for posts and videos that could attract more people," Ethan replied, already thinking about possible campaigns. Ella, not wanting to be left out, added, "And I can organize activities for kids during the fair. It's going to be so much fun." Madison looked at her children and colleagues, feeling a wave of pride and affection. "I'm so proud of all of you. Together, we're making a big difference." The meeting ended with laughter and plans for the future. As everyone dispersed, Madison remained for a moment, reflecting on the incredible support she had. Despite the challenges she faced, the strength of the community and the love of her children kept her resilient and motivated. Madison was in her office at the NGO, reviewing plans for the upcoming adoption fair, when Daniel entered, his usually calm expression replaced by evident concern. He gently closed the door behind him before speaking. "Madison, we need to talk," Daniel began, hesitantly. "We've received some complaints from the local council. It seems not everyone is happy with the increase in our activities." Madison set aside the documents, her attention now fully on Daniel. "What kind of complaints?" "They're claiming that we're causing too much traffic and that the noise during our events is disturbing the peace of the neighborhood," Daniel explained, running a hand through his hair. Madison sighed, a mix of frustration and defiance shining in her eyes. "That's ridiculous. Our events are well organized and no noisier than a normal day in the park. Do you know what's really going on here?" Daniel nodded, his gaze hardening. "Yes, I think so. One of the counselors, Mr. Harrow, has connections with real estate developers. It seems they have other plans for the area where we hold our fairs." Madison stood up, her determination clear in her posture. "Well, they're not going to intimidate or drive us away with unfounded complaints. We'll fight this." In the following days, Madison and Daniel prepared a detailed presentation for the next council meeting, arming themselves with statistics, community support testimonials, and evidence of the NGO's positive impact. They also organized a signature campaign, showing strong local support for the NGO's work. The day of the council meeting arrived, and the small auditorium was full. Madison sat in the front row, her documents and notes in front of her, while murmurs of conversation filled the air. When it was her turn to speak, Madison approached the podium with confidence. "Ladies and gentlemen of the council, I understand that there have been some concerns about our activities," she began, her voice firm and clear. "However, I would like to present a different perspective." She continued, highlighting the beneficial work of the NGO, the joy it brought to the community, and how they had carefully mitigated any inconveniences. "Our goal is to enrich this community, not disturb it." After the presentation, Mr. Harrow stood up. "We appreciate your perspective, Mrs. Clark. However, we must consider all aspects, including the future economic development of the area." Madison responded promptly. "With all due respect, Mr. Harrow, economic development should not come at the expense of the community that is already here and clearly values and supports what we do." The discussion continued for a few more minutes until the council president called for order. "We will take all this information into consideration and make a decision at the next session." Madison returned to her seat, feeling cautiously optimistic. She had done everything she could. Now it was a matter of waiting. After the tense council meeting, Madison often found herself in the small local cafe, a cozy space where many community members gathered to discuss local events and share news. It was here that she met Henry, a community activist whose commitment to sustainable and fair development of the city was well known among the locals. Henry approached Madison one morning as she was reviewing some documents for the NGO. He held a coffee in one hand and extended the other in greeting. "You're Madison Clark, right? I've heard a lot about the incredible work you're doing." Madison looked up, surprised and a bit cautious, but Henry's genuine smile quickly dissipated her reservations. "Yes, that's me. And you are?" "Henry Collins. I work in community development here in the neighborhood, and I'm also involved in various sustainability projects." Henry sat down at the table, his interest clearly piqued. "I was at the council meeting the other day. You were quite impressive." "Thank you, Henry. It's been a struggle, but it's worth it," Madison replied, feeling a wave of gratitude for finding someone who understood the importance of her work. In the days that followed, Henry and Madison met several times, often discussing strategies to strengthen the NGO's position in the community and how to effectively combat the developers threatening the neighborhood's integrity. One afternoon, as they walked through the local park, Henry shared more about his background. "I grew up here, and I've seen many changes, not all good. That's why I think it's so important to support projects like yours. You're making a real difference." Madison smiled, looking at him with newfound admiration. "It's good to have someone who understands. And I really appreciate all the support, Henry. Sometimes it feels like I'm fighting alone." "You're not alone," Henry affirmed, stopping and looking directly at her. "You have the community behind you, and you have me too." Those words, simple but sincere, touched Madison deeply. She felt empowered not only by the strategic support Henry offered, but also by the emotional bond that was beginning to form between them. As their relationship deepened, Madison found in Henry not just a partner in the fight for common causes, but also someone who offered comfort and understanding in moments of doubt and weariness. Their meetings became a bright spot in her days, re-energizing her for the challenges ahead. On a quiet afternoon, sitting together after a planning meeting at the NGO, Henry took Madison's hand. "You know, I truly believe in what we're doing here. And more than that, I believe in us." Madison, moved and a bit surprised, smiled. "I do too, Henry. I believe in us too." With Henry's support, Madison felt more prepared to face any challenges that came her way. Together, they were stronger, and this gave Madison new hope and determination to move forward. The tension was palpable in the air-conditioned conference room where Madison met with her lawyer, Thomas, and a team of legal consultants. Scattered across the table were piles of documents, each marking a stage of the legal battle Madison was about to face. "What can we expect today?" Madison asked, trying to keep her voice steady as she adjusted the papers in front of her. Thomas looked at her, his expression serious but not without a spark of encouragement. "Today, we'll challenge Bradley's attempt to contest the will. He's claiming that your father was under undue influence when he made the final changes." Madison took a deep breath, frustrated but ready. "We know that's not true. My father made those changes for a good reason." "Exactly," Thomas agreed. "We have testimonies from several reliable witnesses, plus all the financial records and communications from your father that clearly show his intentions. We are well prepared." As they headed to the courthouse, Madison felt a mix of nervousness and determination. Entering the courtroom, her gaze met Bradley's, who was seated on the other side, accompanied by his own lawyer. He tried to maintain a confident posture, but Madison could see the insecurity in his eyes. The judge entered, and everyone stood up. When the court was called to order, Bradley's lawyer began presenting his case, alleging inconsistencies in the will and questioning William Clark's mental capacity in his final days. "That's simply not true," Madison whispered to Thomas as they listened to the allegations. When it was Thomas's turn to present Madison's case, he began assertively. "We will present clear evidence and testimonies that confirm the validity of William Clark's will. Furthermore, we will show that all decisions made by him were conscious and intentional, meant to protect his daughter and her children." One after another, Thomas called the witnesses. An old friend of William testified about his lucidity and clear intentions in his final days. A mental health expert confirmed that there were no signs of cognitive impairment that could have affected his decisions. Madison was called to testify. Standing with her hand on the Bible, she looked directly at the judge, her voice firm. "My father loved his family and his company. He would never have made changes to his will without a very strong and just reason. He knew what he was doing." After hours of intense arguments from both sides, the judge finally retired to deliberate. The ensuing silence seemed to stretch interminably. Madison sat down, holding Henry's hand, who had come to support her. Finally, the judge returned and announced that a decision would be given. "After carefully considering all the evidence and testimonies presented, I find William Clark's will valid and legitimate. There is not enough evidence to support the claims of undue influence. Madison felt immense relief and a wave of gratitude for everyone who had helped her. She knew there were still challenges ahead, but that victory strengthened her resolve to continue fighting for her father's legacy and for the well-being of her family and community. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the city as Madison walked slowly through the park, reflecting on the past few weeks. The victory in court had been a tremendous relief, but life, as she well knew, was a mix of highs and lows. Her cell phone rang, breaking the silence of her thoughts. It was Ethan, his voice choked up on the other end. "Mom, you need to come home. It's Grandma June." Madison's heart raced. Grandma June had been a rock in her life, especially after the death of her parents. She quickened her pace back to the car, the phone still pressed to her ear. "What happened, Ethan?" "I'm not sure, but she fainted." "The paramedics are here now," Ethan explained, trying to stay calm. Madison felt a knot form in her stomach. She drove as fast as she could, each second seeming like an eternity. Upon arriving home, she found an ambulance parked out front. She rushed inside, finding Ethan and Ella in the living room, both pale and worried. "How is she?" Madison asked, breathless. "They took her to the hospital," said Ella, tears beginning to stream down her face. "They said it could be serious." Madison hugged her children, trying to offer some comfort despite her own distress. Together, they went to the hospital, finding Grandma June in an ICU bed, surrounded by tubes and monitors. The following days were a blur of waiting and worry. Madison spent hours by Grandma June's bedside, holding her hand, talking to her, even though there was no response. One quiet afternoon, with the sun filtering through the hospital windows, Grandma June finally opened her eyes. Madison, who had been dozing in the chair beside her, woke up immediately. "Grandma," she whispered, leaning forward. June smiled weakly. "Dear, I knew you would be here." "Always, Grandma." "Always," Madison replied, squeezing June's hand. They talked for a few minutes, precious moments that Madison would engrave in her heart. But despite the momentary improvement, Grandma June's condition was fragile, and a few days later, she passed away peacefully. The loss was a devastating blow for Madison. She found herself navigating through deep grief, a mix of mourning and gratitude for the shared memories. At the funeral, as friends and family shared stories about Grandma June, Madison felt a growing strength within herself. "Grandma always said life is a set of cycles, of gains and losses," Madison shared with those present, her voice firm despite the tears. "She taught me that each loss prepares us for new beginnings, for new victories." Accepting the pain as part of her growth was not easy, but Madison learned that each experience, good or bad, had its value. She emerged from mourning with new resilience, ready to face future challenges with the wisdom that Grandma June had imparted. The NGO's office was filled with vibrant and hopeful energy. Walls adorned with photos of recent events and rescued animals reflected the positive impact of Madison and her team's relentless work. It was a special day, marking the one-year anniversary since the NGO had significantly expanded its operations, thanks to Madison's investment and leadership. She was reviewing the annual report, a detailed document that cataloged each success and challenge faced over the year. The numbers spoke for themselves: increased adoptions, expansion of educational programs, and community engagement that exceeded all initial expectations. "Madison, have you seen this?" Daniel entered the office, a broad smile on his face as he held a copy of the report. "Our community engagement numbers have doubled since last quarter." Madison looked up, sharing Daniel's enthusiasm. "It's amazing, isn't it? Seeing all this on paper makes all the struggle worth it." They spent the morning discussing next steps. Madison was particularly interested in a new project: creating a community park that would not only offer a green space for the neighborhood, but also serve as an educational center for sustainability practices. I was thinking about how we can integrate the community more into our projects. A community park would be the perfect place for that, Madison explained, spreading maps and sketches across the table. I love that idea, said Daniel, examining the plans. We can use it to teach children about the importance of conservation while providing a space for everyone to relax and connect with nature. Madison nodded, feeling a wave of inspiration. Exactly. And that's not all. We can organize regular events, like local craft fairs, gardening workshops, and even yoga sessions at dawn. As the day progressed, Madison and Daniel organized a meeting with community leaders to present the park idea. The meeting was filled with enthusiasm and support, with many volunteers offering to help. That night, after a long but gratifying day, Madison walked through the neighborhood, reflecting on the changes she had helped foster. She stopped in front of the land that would be transformed into the community park, imagining the children playing, families picnicking, and the community growing even more united. She felt a deep satisfaction, knowing she was on the right path. The morning and challenges of the past year had been tough, but they had also prepared her for this moment of renewal and hope. Madison knew that with each new project, she was not only honoring her father's legacy but also building her own. The sun was setting over the new community park, casting long shadows and gilding the leaves of newly planted trees. Madison sat on a wooden bench, watching families and friends enjoying the space she had helped create. Her heart was filled with a sense of accomplishment and peace. Beside her, Henry held her hand, sharing the moment of quietude. "You've done something incredible here, Madison," he said, squeezing her hand affectionately. Madison smiled, looking out over the lively park. "I didn't do this alone. It's the result of many hands and hearts." They continued to watch in silence until Ethan and Ella joined them, both with bright smiles after an impromptu soccer game with some local children. "Mom, this place is amazing!" Ella exclaimed, her face flushed from the run. "Everyone is saying how much they love the park." Ethan agreed, adding, "And they're all talking about how it's changed the neighborhood for the better." "You really made a difference, Mom." Madison looked at her children, the future she dreamed for them reflected in their eyes full of life and hope. "I wanted to build something lasting, something you could be proud of, not just as a safe haven, but as a place where our community can grow and thrive." As night fell, Madison stood up and walked to the small stage that had been set up in the center of the park for the opening event. Taking the microphone, she looked out at the crowd that had gathered. "Good evening, everyone," Madison began, her voice clear and strong. "When we started this project, it was a dream to transform a forgotten space into a gathering place for everyone, a pulsating heart for our community." She paused, allowing her words to resonate. "Today, looking at all of you here, I see that we've achieved much more than that. We've created a home, a space to learn, play, and grow together. We've overcome adversities not just to survive, but to thrive." Madison continued, speaking about the importance of community, sustainability, and shared responsibility. "This park is a symbol of what we can achieve when we come together. It's proof that, even in difficulties, there is always an opportunity to do good." Concluding her speech, Madison took a moment to remember her parents. "My parents taught me the value of hard work and integrity. Today, I hope they're proud, knowing that their legacy inspired something so beautiful." The crowd warmly applauded, many with tears in their eyes, moved by Madison's passion and sincerity. She stepped down from the stage into the open arms of her family and friends, feeling a deep gratitude and optimism for the future. As the night deepened and stars began to shine over the park, Madison knew that each challenge faced had strengthened her resolve and her ability to make a difference. She had turned adversities into opportunities, honoring her parents' legacy and, most importantly, paving a path of hope and possibility for everyone around her.
So, if you're not subscribed yet, click on the subscribe button below and join our community. Thank you for your support and see you in the next videos.